I'd like to welcome everyone to our discussion today. Just a brief word of introduction. As the Summit for Democracy convenes, representatives of states and societies around the globe will be discussing how to revitalize democratic governance in the face of a challenging international environment, resurgent authoritarianism, and a crisis of trust in many democratic institutions. In a world in which digital tools increasingly mediate social and political life, navigating technological change will be one part of strengthening and sustaining democracy for the future. In recent months, commentators and analysts have been grappling with the possible impacts of generative AI tools such as ChatGPT on politics and the information environment, trying to figure out how AI-generated words and images might change the way people acquire knowledge and engage with their societies. This is just one example of how publics, experts, and institutions are scrambling to shape norms that can keep up with the rapid pace of technological development. But technology's impacts on democracies aren't limited to a distinct online space that we enter when we open our browsers, and they're not only associated with systems that draw the most public attention. Today, we'll be hearing from contributors to the forum's new essay series, The Digitalization of Democracy, about how digital tools in the public sector are already transforming how governments provide services, dispense justice, and relate to citizens. This transformation is often seen as a way to improve the quality and fairness of governance, and that can sometimes be the case. Digitalization can provide valuable new options for citizens to engage with their governments. As we'll be hearing, it can help watchdog institutions and the general public to more effectively monitor officials. Yet digital tools in government hands can also be co-opted for corrupt or authoritarian purposes. They can erode the foundations of privacy, and they can create unexpected obstacles to state accountability. Once automated systems are put in place to determine citizens' access to state services or public life, officials can, for instance, blame these systems for their own politically motivated decisions. We've already seen this scenario play out with the abuse of health code apps in the People's Republic of China. Digital authoritarian models are already available. If digital governance tools are placed beyond scrutiny or simply dismissed as too complicated for non-specialists to discuss, public officials in struggling democracies may find themselves slipping down this path. In this sense, digital evolution isn't just offering up new tools. It's changing the type of work, the type of knowledge, and the type of partnerships that are going to be needed to perform the traditional tasks of democratic advocacy, such as holding governments accountable for their actions. In order to be prepared for the digital advances that are likely in the coming years, democracies will need strategies and mechanisms in place to begin addressing these challenges today. Clear thinking is needed about how to fully leverage the pro-democratic potential of tools like AI, while also developing approaches to tech procurement, design, and deployment that will ensure democratic principles are baked into new digital products. Collaboration across state and civil society on these issues and engagement across national lines is crucial. By engaging across sectors, we can identify new models both for securing and ensuring accountability in the use of tech and for leveraging tech in the service of accountability. Drawing on their experience as advocates for open government, our contributors will be sharing their insights on the current state of digital accountability and how democracy's supporters can raise their game to sustain democratic principles against a backdrop of significant technological change. And I'd also like to take this moment before I hand it over to my colleague, Beth Curley, to recognize Beth for her terrific work on our emerging tech portfolio, and also Jesse Broadfuhrer and the entire forum team for the great work they've done setting up this event and on this topic. And with that, over to Beth.
Thanks very much, Chris, and welcome everyone wherever you may be listening from. I'm so pleased to be here today launching the third report in the forum's Making Tech Transparent series. So building on the previous investigations we've done looking at AI surveillance and smart cities technology, today we'll be hearing about how digitalization and digital advances are transforming the work of holding governments accountable. And we have a great group of contributors here who'll be drawing on their experience in the open government community in order to reflect on this question. As a note to our viewers, please feel free to submit questions through the YouTube chat. We'll be taking some of those later in the program. But for now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. So we have here with us today Krzysztof Izdebski, who is co-lead of the Open Spending EU Coalition and Legal and Policy Officer at the Stefan Batory Foundation, Tiona Turishvili, who is head of local government and internet and innovations directions at the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information in Georgia, which aims to support the development of an informed and empowered society to foster democratic governance. And Haikui Haratunian, who is a human rights defender and lawyer currently serving as chair of the Corruption Prevention Commission of the Republic of Armenia, a newly established independent body that develops and implements the country's corruption prevention policies. And so to kick us off, I'd like to turn to Krzysztof, who is the author of the first essay in our series, which we'll be releasing today, which looks kind of at the big picture of how technology intersects with state accountability and the rule of law. So Krzysztof, your paper discusses how a range of increasingly popular digital tools, from online voting platforms to digital surveillance systems to automated decision-making tools that might determine, for instance, who receives social benefits, are, quote, becoming an integral part of the government-citizen relationship. What did you mean by this, and what are the implications of that for people who are in the democracy support community and others who are working to ensure accountable government?
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, everyone, for having me and for giving me opportunity to write this interesting paper, because also I'm feeling myself as being the part of the pro-democratic, rule of law, freedom of information community for many, many years. But also since 2015, 2016, I just realized that this is exactly what you've been asking. I mean, technology is an integral part of the citizen-government relationship. It's not like a science fiction, like some people, might know that we know from the movies like a Terminator, Judge Dredd, or Minority Report. But let me give you a very descriptive example to show the link between the technology and the citizen government relations. And this is also an example that you can read more in the paper that I wrote for you. So when the Polish court, the Polish administrative court, gave a ruling in the freedom of information case, in which it stated that the algorithm of the random system of allocation of cases to specific judges should be available to the public, it said in the justification that this is because it constitutes the way how the public bodies are now performing public tasks. So in other words, technological progress is enabling to change specific tools, but they are being used to perform the traditional roles of authorities. I mean, the same goes for controlling our taxes or distributing social benefits. I think nothing has changed in the last centuries, let's say, on the way how the administration operates, on the philosophy as such, and what we as citizens expect from administration or public entities. I think that just the mode or the form on how the authorities and citizens collaborate has indeed changed. And taking this into account, I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of making a division between human rights or citizens' rights and digital rights. I see that there are a bit different patterns of risk connected with the usage of technology in the public sector, like amplifying bias or intensifying the infringement of privacy. But altogether, these problems are connected with our good friends, or bad friends actually, lack of sufficient transparency and effective accountability of the government actions.
So that's a really interesting example, and I think one most people don't think about, right? How algorithms might be working behind the scenes in government agencies, not even in ways that citizens directly see, but in order to determine which officials are dealing with cases, or perhaps how government resources are allocated. And then following up on that, in terms of why we should be worrying, you lay out 3 illustrative types of risks that the use of certain digital governance tools in the public sector can present. And these are false objectivity, discriminatory impacts, and erosions of privacy. So before we turn to the rest of our panel, could you quickly tell us a little bit about what these risks might entail and why you see them as democracy issues?
Sure. So I think like there's a lot of discussion already, and you can find really fabulous publication on the risk of discrimination or erosions or privacy. And these are the matters which are, I would say, quite obvious, or when we're thinking about the risk that technology can bring, the discrimination, the bias, the way how also the historical biases are being amplified by the contemporary technology, especially using artificial intelligence. It's pretty well-known thing, although I just have to make this comment. Well known, I think, among specialists, not really well known. Unfortunately, yet among the public officials and many CSOs. But I want to take into account that we don't have a lot of time, at least at the moment. I want to bring your attention to what I call the false objectivity, because I think it's one of the biggest problems in terms of this impact that technology have on democracy and this interlinkage between them. So there is a popular claim that the machines are more objective, like machines, algorithms, whatever you call it. But this is not true. I mean, there are as objective as the people creating them. We have some examples from United States or from Netherlands where under the cover of algorithmic objectivity, authorities were pushing for cutting social benefits and access to health services. And instead of being responsible and openly admitting that it was a political decision, because this is a political decision, they were trying to blame the computer. So you can see that it's, again, a matter of the pure accountability. And this accountability is one of the pillars of the rule of law, which we may lose if we will not approach the usage of technology in the public sector with exactly the same expectation as we have towards the performance of public tasks by the living human being. So very often this like false objectivity would mean that, yes, we will give a power, or the public official or decision makers are claiming we will give a power to algorithms to select a judge, to decide on the level of access to the health services. But it's actually sometimes, and sorry for using this word, it's an act of cowardness not to admitting that we actually want to cut the access to the health services, or actually we want to manipulate the way how the judges are being selected. Always, please just remember, we can only trust tools when we can trust politicians who are implementing them.
Thanks. And it is certainly an important point that digitalization doesn't take away the much older and still enduring concern of having accountable government institutions. At the same time, technology can be a useful tool for those within government who are working for accountability to uphold those principles. So we've heard from Christoph about some of the risks associated with digitalization and the importance of having mechanisms and strategies in place somehow to address those risks. But used appropriately and with thoughtful oversight, these tools can confer significant benefits. And so simply turning away from them may not be an alternative. And to get a clearer sense of what those benefits are, particularly in terms of supporting the work of watchdog bodies that are working to fight corruption, ensure open government, and hold officials accountable, I want to turn to Haikui. So you're currently chair of the Corruption Prevention Commission of Armenia, which has been working on developing a new digital platform, which you hope to eventually add AI capabilities to. And I want to hear a little bit about how you hope that this new platform and the use of algorithmic decision-making and AI in particular will help the Commission in its work monitoring for possible cases of corruption among public officials.
Thank you very much. Let me thank, first of all, for making me part of this very much interesting discussion, but also part of the entire forum. It's my pleasure to share the experience currently from the position of chair of Corruption Prevention Commission of the Republic of Armenia, but also keeping so much attention and focus on the very much important topics that I was really focusing in my previous capacity, acting as a human rights lawyer, and especially putting that much attention on the privacy rights and data protection for individuals that can be protected from the state. So within my current position, I guess what Christoph also mentioned as a risk for those kind of mechanisms that are getting more tendency, but also used by the government. For us, I will reformulate the question something like this: how then accountability of public offices for being accountable can be ensured when it comes to technology and use of also artificial intelligence. To provide more details and explain also what is the current use of the system by the Corruption Prevention Commission of Republic of Armenia and what is that in its essence, I will just explain where we started, how we started, and what is there as a stake that is very much interesting for the public in general, but also for us as a specialized agency to prevent corruption among public officials who are holding important positions, and there is very much risk for the abuse of that power and get benefits in forms of money, any kind of income, property, etc. So first of all, I would like to introduce the concept of Corruption Prevention Commission of Armenia. So this is a state institution with independency and kind of mandate that holds public officials accountable under a number of requirements, including the assets, interest, and incomes of public officials, but also those they are residing with public officials. In other words, we are kindly possessing the system of declarations through which the public officials submit their annual declarations declaring their wealth in general, and also providing any kind of information that demonstrates that there is any deviation in the wealth of public officials, but also including those who are residing with them and also family members. So with this, the country actually assumed some kind of responsibility, also international responsibilities under the general obligations to fight and prevent corruption, and mainly under the OECD regular assessment. The country got that evaluation that there has to be some kind of system through which public officials can be held accountable, and then there can be reassured that there is no any kind of tendency in the activity of any certain public official when it comes to corruption. And with that idea, there was this legitimate requirement from public officials to provide information about their assets, income, and interest. And with that also start, by the years, there was also need that this kind of information that has to be collected can be done manually and can be done on the based on the paper form. So as Christoph mentioned, there are requirements for the accountability of public officials, and we were lucky that also this is not a unique kind of instrument and also regulation that is only for Armenia. There were other EU member countries, including the Poland, about which Christoph already mentioned, that instituted this kind of systems. And also there was a case against Poland brought to the European Court of Human Rights, and court have finally decided that it is legitimate and it is for the state interest to collect information about those who are holding very much important positions, who are politically more sensitive and have to be more sensitive when it comes to decision-making power that they are given. And also this information that is collected can be also processed and analyzed. Based on that, we further explored how then the effectiveness of the system itself can be enhanced. And we came up with the idea that the current tendency of technology and also use of artificial intelligence can help us to build a system where public officials are really accountable. Then also the data that is collected can be analyzed, not manually, but automatically. And also the results also can be available for larger public, which is also the part of the requirement for the accountability of public officials. With that, we have started the process of developing that platform, which is currently already in a use for only first phase data collections, through which we finally came to the point where the Commission has the capacity to collect so-called structural data, which means that the later any kind of analytical tools and algorithms that also Christoph mentioned can be used to structure data and to kind of make any kind of conclusion, or to notice the so-called red flags whenever there is unjustified and not compliance information within the declaration of the public official itself, but also compare with other existing systems. With this kind of innovative approach and the tool that we have started to use also, we took the note and were very much careful to ensure that also the possibility already mentioned also again by Christoph, that also by the state institution also, this process of data collection, but also analyze and use of data can be manipulated, is somehow avoided. And for this also, again, as a part of other international instruments for human rights protections, we are bound by the data protection rules that are governing member countries under the Council of Europe, and some kind of regulations that are there within the EU member countries. They are not fully kind of executed in Armenia, but there are still some kind of regulations that impose on us also the requirement that requirements for data protection and also requirements for avoiding manipulative decision-making using algorithms as a decision-making tool are avoided. And for that, we have had many discussions and also expert communications also with people who actually started to develop those kind of regulations at local level, but also at international level, using also some kind of expertise coming from the Council of Europe on data protection that can ensure that the algorithm that our system will use is really not manipulative. And also that accountability that is additionally required for usage of such kind of electronic systems is there for us, and it is done again by the public. So the information which is collected as a declaration is publicized immediately. And there is no possibility for the Corruption Prevention Commission that any kind of change in an already submitted declaration can be done. So it is available for public for the use and for their own also analytics as well. But at the same time, certain aspects of data, which is important for the analytics, is also provided to larger public in order again to hold us also accountable, not only for the specific mandate of corruption prevention that is there for us, but also for the data protection requirements. And in this shape and with this capacity, I kind of really want to believe that the usage of the current trends on technology and especially artificial intelligence gives more benefit to the institutions such as Corruption Prevention Commission, and not only locally, but also internationally, because then the data exchange and also accountability as a more general requirement, not only at the local level, but also at the international level, is there for public officials as well, because all these declarations also with the current system are easily automatically translated into English language, which gives also and provides opportunity to other state institutions outside of Armenia, but also individuals, to check and see whether certain public official has any kind of suspicious transaction and report about that. With this also, we somehow aim very soon to connect our data collection system to very newly created another system, which is again part of also this obligation at a global level to fight corruption, and it is about beneficial ownership concept, under which also certain specific positions are required locally to submit information about their stakes and shareholds at local but also international level. And through that system also actually public officials are held accountable. So this is kind of a very brief description of the system, but also I will be happy further to answer questions and present more details about the system in a way that again we kind of ensure that this manipulative way of using algorithmic decision functions at least now is not there for us as a decision-making institution for such a kind important but also sensitive topic as a corruption.
Thanks so much, Haikui, and I really appreciated hearing not just about the benefits you expect to get from the platform, but also the steps you've been taking to make sure that behind the scenes manipulation of the technology itself is not happening and building in safeguards for that. And one thing I also wanted to flag in your response that I think it's important to keep in mind about these systems was the benefits that can come from having data available in a more structured fashion and using the capacities of new data processing tools like AI to make sense of that information. So we think a lot about the risks that can come due to flaws in that processing, but at the same time, there are purposes to which it might be served that are clearly beneficial for the cause of open government. So turning now to Tiona, we've heard a bit about why advanced digital tools in the public sector can support good governance and also about the risks they posed if used carelessly or in the wrong hands. And that would seem to leave us with the conclusion that, as we've argued in some of these essays, it's important to ensure appropriate oversight of governance technologies, both within government and from the civil society sector, which you represent. But there are some factors right now when we're dealing especially with advanced technologies like AI that can make it particularly difficult for groups like your own to carry out that kind of oversight. So your organization, which has traditionally worked to uphold open government norms vis-a-vis conventional public institutions, decided a few years ago to apply this experience and try to figure out how public officials in Georgia were using AI tools. And that information turned out to be a bit difficult to come by. So what obstacles made that so challenging?
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be part of this discussion, and thank you for your interest in our study as well. Actually, this research was one of the first attempts in Georgia to study the use of artificial intelligence systems in the public sector. And as you mentioned, it was indeed challenging for us to get comprehensive data, and I will try to enlist and share several factors, and also you will find some kind of findings of our study and some of the updates actually after this study was published in the essay what we prepared. So as for these factors, as I mentioned already, first of all, there is no clear definition of artificial intelligence, including on the legislative level in Georgia. And that's why it was challenging even for public officials to draw clear lines between AI and other types of softwares with high level of automation. This situation actually provided particular institutions reluctant to share data with us with a ready pretext to leave in our request for public information about AI tools unanswered. In such cases, we tried to somehow collect data from other sources, especially from public procurement online platforms, what we have in Georgia, and other relevant online sources as well. At the same time, we tried to reach out to public officials and explain what we meant under our FOI request and make some introductory meetings with them and explain what was the purpose of our study. Another factor which caused these challenges for us was the lack of a common registry with information about AI systems in the use by public agencies, and it created situations that even public officials and the government don't have clear some kind of understanding about the use of such systems by other agencies. Therefore, the majority of public institutions provided us with a general description of functions of particular AI systems, and afterwards we have been trying to collect data from other sources. And in most cases, they did not share additional relevant documentation, such as technical manuals, users' instructions, legal or normative acts governing the use of software, ethical standards, or personal data protection safeguards or guidelines they have been following. So these are major, some kind of takeaways I can share with you regarding this issue. And I'm very pleased to share some other aspects of our findings as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tiona. And I think the cases you mentioned point to some of the challenges involved in conducting a new form of government oversight in a new area where norms and principles are not always clearly defined, and that can intersect with the perhaps traditional challenges of getting information out of public institutions, with which I'm sure you're very familiar. So turning back to Christoph, you've looked at cases similar to this one where civil society groups are trying to figure out how their governments are using AI and other automated decision-making tools across a range of countries in Central and Eastern Europe. And I'm curious, based on that experience, it seems that Tiona's experience is not unique. So why haven't officials been paying enough attention to the use of digital technologies and shaping norms around digital technologies in the public sector? What problems does that create? And are there best practices you would recommend to start addressing those issues?
Thank you. I just have to admit that also I had a pleasure to work with Tiona back in 2019, and we're kind of pioneers, at least in the region, that we're talking about it. And sometimes for our freedom of information request, we had really strange answers that basically proved that yes, indeed, the public officials were not really prepared, not only to implement the technology, but also to discuss this with citizens. But I just want to underline, I think, first thing is that this is not only the case of officials. That I think that we as CSOs, as citizens, as journalists, are not paying enough attention to. And as much as citizens and the human beings, we like technology because objectively it makes our lives easier, and we are ready to share the data on our kids, on the diets we are on, with the platforms for all of sorts of benefits. We just feel comfortable with the fact that we can calculate the taxes or take part in the election process without leaving our home. So it's natural that we see benefits and less often the risks, or basically we not reflect maybe enough about those. But again, I think it is, and you're absolutely right asking me this question, I think it is primarily the responsibility of public officials to show us that there are risks, or potentially that may be risks, or that they were mitigated. So proving that when they are performing the public task or delivering public services, that they are free of the risk of discrimination, infringing privacy, of this false objective that I was mentioning earlier. But also to achieve this, I think we need to talk about it, we need to increase the competences of public officials, but also the relevant CSOs. One of the main problems in the area is still a kind of a mindset that, let the IT people work on technology because it's a technical matter. But I think in contrary, I mean, if you work with any decision, you as the public official or a CSO, work with any decision-making process, irrespective of how it is implemented, you should understand how it works. And I think also when it comes to the practices, apart from, I think, the big need of increasing the competences, both the public officials and civil society actors, especially those that are dealing with the cases of discrimination, of working with the minorities or other groups that are being exposed to discriminatory practices. I think that we should have this systemic approach. Again, it is a matter of the transparency, accountability, and also there are already successful examples from the countries like Canada or France, but also some Central and Eastern European countries, for example. They have this idea in their AI strategies, is to, before the tool is actually implemented, to perform the technological or as some other people are calling it, algorithmic impact assessment. With this impact assessment, is kind of a similar for all the folks that are working with the regulatory impact assessment. So when we prepare legal provisions, we are checking how the situation is being solved in other countries, whether we tried any non-legislative measure to tackle the problem, etc., etc., etc. This goes the same with technology. I mean, we need to understand why certain technology has to be implemented, because sometimes this is the problem that I haven't really mentioned, but I do believe there's a bit about it in the paper itself. Sometimes we have this tech solutionism. So basically, yes, just do the tech, but it doesn't matter, or it doesn't reflect the real needs of the citizens or real need of the public administration. So one of the most important things when doing this kind of a technological impact assessment is to understand why certain technology has to be implemented and whether the problems that we think it should solve will be actually solved thanks to technology. Because sometimes it's a matter, you know, of just, again, lack of accountability, lack of responsibility, or sorts of problems that are present in administration and other public entities. Also, in terms of this impact assessment, we should know and understand, and this should be made public, what kind of data are being processed, whether there are some discriminatory risks being detected, and what is the idea of the public institution to mitigate that. But I think, as in any other case, when we're talking about democracy, it may be only successful when we'll have an engagement of all stakeholders. So it's not the technology, and talking about the technology in public sector, first of all, it's not a matter or the things for the IT folks and the people who are, you know, have a very technical competences. It's a matter of forming the effective and responsive public administration.
Thanks. Again, terribly important points there, that we're not just talking about issues that have a technical right answer. We're talking about questions of values and principles. And as with any other democratic decision-making process, it's important to look across different sectors and involve different stakeholders in thinking about those kinds of decisions. I'm going to turn back to Haikui, but before I do, just a quick note to those of you who are listening online, please do feel free to submit questions in the YouTube chat if you'd be interested in asking anything of our panelists. And turning to Haikui, I'd like to pick up on a question that you touched on a bit at the end of your previous response. So we're talking about the need for government institutions to take these safeguards and engage different stakeholders. You've actually experienced what it's like working in order to go through this process. And in your essay, you talked, or we'll be talking, your essay will be released in a few weeks, about some of the challenges you encountered at different stages of this process in terms of getting a clearer sense of your technical needs, building trust with private sector partners, and navigating transparency and privacy trade-offs. So could you tell us a bit about how that process went, and what steps did you, as someone working within a public institution, take in order to get to the point where you described where safeguards are built into the tech, in order to make sure that your approach to collecting and processing data in this sensitive area was both effective and in line with democratic principles?
Thank you again for this another very much important question. And here I will again refer very number of times to Christoph and Tiona also, because what Tiona mentioned, I will fully echo that in our case also, there has been so big challenge with the process of interoperability, so-called interoperability, when there are different state institutions holding different pieces of data, and now you need to use them. And then unfortunately, the data structure is not the same, data quality is not, it is not the same, and you don't know actually how to make them compatible, but also then how your new system can address also data collection issues that are there for the another institution. So this was one of the biggest challenges we faced. We have somehow overcame this kind of challenge. At this moment, we found a solution how to clean data, and at least in our database, to ensure that we have clean data, the one which is required also by the form of declarations, and then the usage of that kind of data doesn't create any kind of challenges, but also difficulties, not only for us internally, but also for a larger public, because that lack of structured data, but also interoperability previously was the reason that declarations were there publicized as a PDF form, and it didn't allow to have a search function. And actually, public largely was not able to compare data within different declarations, and also to get immediate kind of result when there is any kind of inconsistency. But I guess this is like one of the challenges, but the biggest one, as I mentioned. But I also want also to refer to Christoph and say that for state institutions, but also for the civil society, I guess, this is a kind of a new tendency that brings a challenge that the language that actually used by public administration, by civil society, and what is there for those who are really working and kind of developing codes and digital tools is not the same. And the idea, but also the purpose of such tools initially is not the same. So the first challenge we have faced was then how to explain and how to translate what public administration or the institution that somehow uses some functions of public administration aims for effective data collection, effective data usage, but also for the public and civil society to be able to perform their watchdog function is the kind of tool that can be used as part of this technology. And then what kind of requirements we were able to put for those who are actually making this technology in order to receive and get the product that we were aiming to have, and simplify the processes for the users, any kind of user, not only public at large, but also those who are actually submitting declarations, but also for ourselves to ensure that, as I mentioned, this effective analytical part is there. But also, as we have inherited the system, the entire government, which was corrupt for a long time, just the dialogue with the private sector, those working on tech, in the beginning was so much difficult, because traditionally the tenders, such as like organizing the competition over these kind of projects, building the instrument or advancing the instrument for the public institution, was something that was a process engaged with the corruption. And there was a huge distrust from the private sector that our tender is not the same, or not repeating the same as it was previously. And when we first announced the tender, there was no any application from local or international vendors, and it created the situation when we had a huge delay when we aim to start developing the system, and we kind of how we actually were able to proceed with that. And after that, I guess it required additional 2 or 3 months while we were able to rebuild that trust and have number of discussions with the private sector, actually with the vendors, who actually also educated us very well to understand our own objectives, but also articulate and kind of provide all the requirements in a way that any kind of vendor could understand and easily start working for us and with us actually. And that actually works. For the second round, we had 5 applicants for this project. 3 of them were international vendors, 2 of them were locals, and finally we have started developing the platform. The other challenge, and the last one I will mention to sum up, was that actually we haven't had any understanding about this architect of the platforms, such the one that we were aiming to build, and how it can fit into the entire infrastructure of the data government in the country, and how actually it can further be developed. And that was also one of the challenges we were able to overcome, being so much effective with our communication with vendors, but also building very much effective cooperation with the tech people and with the private sector, that now we really kind of advancing our own capacities to have also in-house team that later can support the CPC, but also the government at large to further make the usage of data collected by different platforms more effective.
Great, thanks so much. It was really interesting to hear, and definitely, again, echoes some comments I've heard from others about people across different sectors learning to speak the same language about tech and to more clearly articulate goals and needs. Tiona, to close out the initial questions from me, if I could ask you to very concisely, so we can get to a few from our audience, set out at the end of your paper, you listed some top order principles that you argue digitalizing democracy should follow in order to integrate AI into the public sector in a responsible way. So what are those 4 principles, and how do you feel they would help in addressing some of the challenges that you identified during your research in Georgia?
Thank you very much. Actually, apart from revealing major challenges and trends, of course, our major aim was to elaborate some recommendations, and we tried to elaborate these recommendations, especially for the public sector. So I will try to somehow enlist this for them. So first of all, it's about public institutions to analyze critical risks before even deploying these particular AI systems. And this principle, to some extent, is very much related to what Christoph already mentioned about impact assessments. And we think that they should have relevant ethical, transparency and accountability mechanisms in place, and ensure that human rights protection mechanisms are considered in advance. Secondly, public institutions should prioritize tech literacy and increase their capacity to understand the workings and challenges of AI systems, getting familiar with emerging tendencies in this field, how to deal with technical errors and other related topics. And we already discussed the importance of awareness raising, not only within the public sector, but also among other stakeholders as well. And I would highlight here that proper attention should be paid to the capacity of public servants on the impact of AI systems on human rights. As also mentioned during our discussion, sometimes it's regarded that AI systems are only for tech people, but of course, we should somehow try to change some kind of attitude. But at the same time, with regard to tech people, we should educate them on human rights aspects of such software. Another principle is to share information with the public. And we believe that citizens and consumers, we can say this way as well, should have sufficient information about the functions and capacities of AI systems, as well as procedures for complaint mechanisms. And I'm sure that such an approach is very important to gain trust and legitimacy with regard to particular AI systems. Last but not least, I believe that public institutions should develop crucial normative frameworks, among which, among other aspects, should include these clear definitions, norms, procedures, or concepts, and of course, transparency and accountability principles, what we already discussed today. So these are major principles, and I'm sure that if public institutions will consider all these factors before even creating particular AI systems, afterwards they will have less some kind of problems, and the systems will be transparent, accountable, and there will be much more some kind of trust, not only from civil society organizations who could be engaged in this development of all these some kind of procedures or normative acts, but also from consumers who will be actually directly affected by particular technologies or technological solutions. So this is from my side. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tiona. We are coming rapidly toward the end of the hour. There are several interesting questions in the chat, and I would encourage all of you to take a look at them after the program. I think we may only have time right now for one. So, Christoph, I'm going to start with you on this because I think it relates to some of the work in the final portion of your paper on the role of civil society in upholding tech norms in the public sector. So how can we induce government officials, and particularly in settings of which there are certainly many today where democracy is under attack, to embrace the use of technology in serving the interest of the public? And if you might reflect in your response on a question that was raised by our team as well, which is difference in the dynamics around these issues in different types of political settings, for instance, in more open versus very closed societies.
Yeah, I think first of all, like very important word that Tiona used is a matter of trust, and I think it's you know, also when we talking about different political contexts or different political environments, the matter of trust is crucial. But the real trust, the trust that we definitely can say that it's not more credible, because as you know, according to the public opinion polls, the biggest trust towards the governments are in China actually. But I don't think that this is a best example of this. But when embracing technologies, we're implementing technologies, when trying to build the whole concept of the government-citizen relations, I think the matter of the trust, which is followed by the transparency, accountability, and responsibility. Again, sorry, I know I'm being boring here with using these three words all again, but I think everything else is just a tool, it's just a technology, is just the way what in certain circumstances, political, geographical, economical circumstances may work on is needed in terms of improving the lives of citizens and improving these relations or the performance of the public institutions, like in the case of Armenia and many other countries. But I think something that we have to have in mind always, and this is regardless, I do believe in the global concept of human rights and citizen rights, is that we have to build these relations and technologies and tools followed by them on the principles of technology, transparency, and accountability.
Thanks very much. Tiona, Haikui, do either of you want to come in on that before we go to our lightning round?
If I may, I would just
Please.
add just two more points, like also continuing the concern or number of risks that Christoph mentioned earlier. So the other challenge that we have kind of avoided, but other state institutions has had an experience of facing, was that like even developing this kind of contract and kind of cooperation with tech companies was very much challenging because of the intellectual property rights, and some had already missed to have that provision through which the codes, the source code of the electronic platform could be transferred to the government institution. And then after some time, when there has not been any kind of chance for funding more to that particular vendor, the system had to be shut down because there has not been any maintenance, and also the government was not able to use also and continue usage of the platform. So this one we have learned early enough to avoid, and actually had the special provision in our contract that all the source codes for the platform that we are developing will be transferred to the government and also shared with the CPC. The second, which continues actually this first one, of course, the benefit of the system, electronic platforms, but also algorithmic decision-making is sure there for the governments, and it really increases accountability and transparency. But at the same time, the security, not only data protection, but security aspects are very much important. And let's imagine that at one moment at the point, there is any kind of lack of protection and security for the entire system, and it gets somehow hacked, or then there is any kind of damage, then it means that you are losing the entire system, but also the very essential part of your function as a part of public administration. So I guess along with data protection requirements, also security has to be prioritized there, that the security for such kind of platforms has to be in a way that we never face that challenge that we have shut down situation and there is no possibility to perform and implement any kind of function.
Great, and I think in some ways you've brought us back to where we started off with Christoph's opening remarks, which is the ways in which these issues that were once thought of as just technical are really also becoming issues for democracy, as platforms like the one you're building are intertwined with the functions of democratic governance. So we have 3 minutes left, and I am therefore really going to hold you to the 30 seconds or less requirement that was promised in advance. But the official proceedings of the Summit for Democracy 2023 are going on as we speak, and advancing technology for democracy will be one of the key themes for discussion tomorrow. If you could give participants just one snippet of advice based on your experience about how to ensure that digital advances in the public sector work in democracy's favor, what would that be? I'm going to start with Tiona.
Thank you. And my first some kind of recommendation or advice will be about sufficient oversight mechanisms. And apart from some kind of international standards in this direction, we should consider local context as well, because sometimes some of the oversight mechanisms are not effective in particular countries, or additional mechanisms are needed, especially in countries where checks and balances are not somehow perfect. And there is need for some, and for example, in Georgia, we have always many concerns when particular AI systems are used, security services of Ministry of Internal Affairs. In this case, we are more concerned that maybe these systems could be used, misused by government officials, and that's why more some kind of oversight mechanisms or accountability mechanisms are needed. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Christoph.
So I can I want really to resonate what Tiona said, the oversight mechanism, which is the part and the pillar of the fundament of the rule of law, basically. I mean, to have the independent institutions that can control the performance of public administration, also in regard to the technology. Again, I have to say, sorry, Beth, transparency, accountability, and responsibility, because this is, if we don't have this in terms of our own state or the country, then we will see it even getting worse with the emerging technologies and very concrete stuff. And I think I really just also want to echo what was said before, the culture of openness, and also thinking that when implementing the technological tools into the public sector, bringing this culture of openness by using the open source, for example. So giving the opportunity not only to check it for specialists and citizens, but also to make this effective control about which Tiona was saying.
Thanks very much. And Haikubi, to close us out.
My immediate response will be put some kind of ethical standards and also principles there for the vendors as well, or for the tech companies, in a way that at least when they start working with the public institutions, they understand that public institutions per their function are already have that requirement to comply with the rule of law, accountability and transparency processes, which immediately applies to all the projects, but also the tools that they will use. And that actually brings to another kind of discussion, and we had this also with the private sector that really doesn't like the rules or the regulations imposed to them. But again, if they really aim to work with government and support the democratic development of a certain government, or in general, the democracy all over the world, they have somehow to comply with integrity rules, with democratic principles, and also kind of have some kind of ethical rules, because they are the ones who are making this algorithm. And if they don't understand and they don't apply those kind of rules, then the government can't hold that responsibility only as a government institution. Otherwise, they will not just benefit from all these technical tools and instruments supported by the new tendencies of technology.
Thank you so much, and thanks to all of you for what was a very rich discussion, as well as for your contributions to our upcoming essay series. So I will encourage everyone to take a look at Christoph's paper, which is available today on our website, and we will be releasing Tiona's piece and Haikui's over the coming weeks, so please stay posted. And visit ned.org/